Do you believe it's been 26 years since we first saw Squall and Cypher clash in that jaw-dropping CG scene, with Library Fatale blasting in the background? Feeling old yet? Today, we're diving into one of the boldest, most misunderstood chapters in Final Fantasy history, Final Fantasy VIII. A game that dared to break every rule right after Final Fantasy VII changed the world. From its groundbreaking visuals to a love story that's still debated today, this is the untold story of how Final Fantasy VIII almost rewrote what an RPG could be. After the massive success of Final Fantasy VII, the pressure to deliver something just as groundbreaking was unreal. That game didn't just raise the bar for the series, it changed gaming forever. And honestly, I think it's the most important RPG ever made. But Final Fantasy always had a trick up its sleeve. Ever since the fourth entry, no two games in the series were ever alike. Each one dared to reinvent itself, offering a fresh story, new worlds, and totally different mechanics. This time, they didn't want to chase what had already been done. They wanted to build something completely new. Yoshinori Kitase, the director behind both Final Fantasy VII and VIII, had a clear vision in mind. He wanted a world where fantasy and realism could live side by side, a place that felt a little closer to ours, but still held that spark of magic that defines the series. One big shift was the overall tone. Final Fantasy VII had a dark, gritty vibe. Cities were shadowy, characters looked worn down by their world. But for VIII, they wanted the exact opposite. Bright skies, vivid colors, a sense of openness and light. The team loved the idea right away. They were hungry to move forward, not just recycle what had worked before. One of the first big moves was pushing the visuals way beyond what Final Fantasy VII had pulled off. The team wanted to leave behind the old super-deformed, chibi-style characters and bring fully proportioned models to life for the first time in the series. Up until then, the characters looked cute and cartoonish, partly because 3D tech was still new, and making full-sized models seemed like a gamble. Back when Final Fantasy VII was made, jumping straight from pixel art to realistic 3D would have been way too risky. But now, it was time to go all in. Yusuke Naora, who led the graphics department, knew this wasn't just about making characters look more realistic. It was about changing the entire way the story would be shown. With the old chibi models, you could get away with wide shots and barely move the camera. Their big heads and exaggerated features made sure you could always read their emotions, even from a distance. That wasn't going to fly anymore. If you wanted to catch Squall's subtle expressions, you had to zoom in close. If you wanted to show action across a full scene, you had to rethink camera angles, framing everything. The result was a game that felt way more cinematic. The world was deeper, more dynamic, and constantly shifting in ways players hadn't seen before. While Final Fantasy VII had about 500 different maps, VIII pushed that number up to 800. The more they worked, the more ideas they found to bring this new vision to life, and they threw in every trick they could imagine. Another major challenge was scaling the cities. With the old chibi characters, you could make buildings massive without worrying about realism. Now that the characters had normal proportions, the team had to rethink everything. Buildings had to feel big, but not cartoonishly oversized, and every structure needed to make sense next to the people walking around them. To breathe real life into these environments, the developers spent a lot of time imagining who lived in these cities. Every little alley, every shop window, every random detail was carefully placed to suggest a story. Tiny stories hidden everywhere, waiting for players who took the time to really look around. The goal was to spark the player's imagination, and they nailed it. Everywhere you turn, Final Fantasy VIII's world feels like it exists beyond just being a backdrop for battles. You'll see realistic cars cruising around, but mixed into cities filled with just enough magical touches to keep that dreamlike feeling alive. Take Balam Garden, for example. At first, the designs just didn't feel right, something was missing. Then someone had the crazy idea to slap a glowing halo on top of the building. It made zero practical sense, but it instantly gave the place that perfect mix of real and surreal that defined the whole project. Making the world brighter and more colorful than Final Fantasy VII added another layer of difficulty. Lighting became a real challenge, especially in the CG scenes, but the payoff is obvious from the very first shot of the game. One look at that sunlit beach, and you know they pulled it off beautifully. The CGs in Final Fantasy VIII weren't just better, they were a straight-up leap into the future, and compared to 7, the upgrade was unreal. Characters looked sharper, the scenes had real emotional weight, and the overall presentation felt like it belonged in a movie theater, not a game console. People had never seen anything like it, especially not on a PlayStation. But killer visuals weren't enough. The animations had to keep up. That's when they brought motion capture into the mix for the first time in the series. It was still early tech, kind of stiff by today's standards, but back then, it made everything feel way more alive. Characters didn't just look better, they moved like real people. On the gameplay side, Hiroyuki Ito was back in the director's chair for the battle system. This guy was responsible for some of the best combat in Final Fantasy, and for 8, he wanted to shake things up. The classic ATB system was still there, but he completely reworked how you customized your characters. Instead of grinding for levels, which barely made a difference, the focus shifted to the junction system. Every character could equip a Guardian Force, basically the game's version of summons, and link magic spells to their stats. And to get magic in Final Fantasy VIII, they introduced a new mechanic called Draw. Instead of learning spells like in previous games, you had to pull magic straight from enemies or certain spots in the world and stockpile it like items. Then, you could either cast it in battle or attach it to your stats using the junction system. The more spells you had of a certain type, the bigger the boost to your strength, defense, or other attributes. You could swap out Guardian Forces to fine-tune different builds or focus on maxing out a single stat if that fit your playstyle. It was all about experimenting, finding what worked for you, and customizing each character however you wanted. But as flexible as it was, the system had its downsides. Some players felt overwhelmed by how much there was to manage. Others got tired of the constant grind to draw magic, especially if you wanted to build a huge stock of spells for junctioning. It could slow things down a lot. Then there was the balancing issue. The game let you abuse its mechanics in a way that made traditional leveling almost pointless. Since enemies level up alongside you, keeping your characters at low levels while boosting your stats through junctioned magic gave you a huge edge. You could steamroll bosses without ever gaining a level. And if you transformed enemies into cards instead of killing them, you avoided experience points altogether. That meant your level stayed low, but your power kept climbing. Once players figured out the system, it didn't take long before things got completely out of hand. All you had to do was enter battles, spam the draw command to stock up on magic, and then turn enemies into cards instead of killing them. That way, you avoided gaining experience and kept your character level locked at 1. Since enemy levels scale with yours, that meant every encounter stayed at its easiest. Meanwhile, you kept boosting your stats using refined magic and AP from those same fights. Some people saw this as a clever form of freedom. Others felt like it broke the core of what makes an RPG fun. After all, if the most effective way to win is to skip the leveling system entirely, it kind of feels like the game's punishing you for playing it the normal way. But that's not what made Final Fantasy VIII stand out. What really stuck with players, what made it their favorite game in the series, and sometimes their favorite game ever, was the story. Unlike Final Fantasy VII, which was more of a team-focused journey where every character had their own arc, 8 zoomed in on just 2. This was Squall and Rinoa's story, and everyone else were there just to support that emotional core. Yoshinori Kitase laid out the general plot, but the actual characters were shaped by Tetsuya Nomura, with the full script written by Kazushige Nojima. Squall's design might seem intense and deliberate, but a lot of it came from pure instinct. Tetsuya Nomura gave him that iconic scar on a whim. There wasn't a backstory or emotional meaning behind it at first. He just thought it looked cool, and told Kazushige Nojima to figure out a reason for it later. That last-minute decision ended up becoming the centerpiece of one of the most memorable openings in the series. The same thing happened with the feathered collar on Squall's jacket. Nomura threw it in because it would be a nightmare to animate, and he wanted to challenge the CG team. That little touch of creative mischief gave the character a signature look and pushed the animators to go even harder with the cinematic quality of the cutscenes. Hey guys, if you're enjoying the video, do me a quick favor and check out Xmod. It's a free tool that lets you skip the grind and the boring parts in over 5,000 single-player games. Need more gold? Can't beat that one boss? With just one click, you've got cheats, trainers, mods, and other features ready to go. No setup, no headaches. It's 100% safe with your Steam account, but yes, single-player only. And just downloading once through my link gives a small commission to the channel and helps us keep making more content for you. It takes less than 15 seconds, I promise. But you have no idea how much it helps us out. So, go ahead and give it a try, it's free. Links in the description and pinned comment. Nomura also brought a fresh idea to the story setting. He wanted something more grounded, something that felt like a slice of youth wrapped in a fantasy world. He imagined the cast as teenagers, living in a military academy that felt like a school. That concept, mixed with Katasa's direction, evolved into Balam Garden, a place that balanced structure and chaos, discipline and freedom. But Nomura had a deeper concern. He felt that Final Fantasy was losing its magical heart. Technology and machines were becoming too dominant in the stories, and the raw, mystical side of the series was starting to fade. So when Katase suggested using a witch design Nomura had drawn years earlier, inspired by Yoshitaka Amano, it lit a spark. That character became the game's main antagonist, and magic was once again front and center. Then there was Laguna, that was created as a foil to Squall. Where Squall and his group were young, reserved, and unsure of themselves, Laguna's crew was older, more confident, and full of life experience. And there was a plan to tie the two storylines together in a powerful ending that would connect their journeys on a deeper level. Nomura pitched the idea, and Katase loved it, but somewhere during development, that connection got lost. It never quite landed the way it was supposed to, and it remains one of the story's biggest missed opportunities. Once the characters and main plot were locked in, Kazushige Nojima sat down to write the actual script. He worked closely with the rest of the dev team, constantly checking in to make sure the story reflected everyone's vision. But at the end of the day, the final word was his. That didn't always sit well with Tetsuya Nomura, who kept tossing in unsolicited feedback, especially when it came to Rinoa. They bumped heads a few times, but somehow managed to find common ground and move forward. What really made Final Fantasy VIII stand out was its writing style. Nojima ditched the overly dramatic fantasy monologues and went for more casual, natural-sounding dialogue. They joked, they got awkward, and they held back when they didn't know what to say. That subtlety made the characters feel more grounded and human, and it was one of the game's most underrated strengths. Underneath the surface-level romance and sci-fi fantasy, Final Fantasy VIII is really a story about identity. It digs into how people are shaped by structure, duty, and emotional walls. How growing up in a world built around war can strip away your sense of self and turn you into something mechanical. But at its core, the theme that ties everything together is love, or as Nojima put it, falling in love. Squall and Rinoa's relationship is meant to carry the whole story, but the problem is, it doesn't always land. Their chemistry often feels rushed and unbalanced, which hurts when the entire plot is centered around them. And when the emotional core of your story feels a bit forced, it drags everything else down with it. The villain, Ultimecia, had potential too. A time-warping sorceress tied to themes of fate and control, but she never really connects with the player. She lacks the intensity or emotional pull that other Final Fantasy villains like Sephiroth or Kefka brought to the table. Still, Final Fantasy VIII wasn't trying to be another grand epic. It was more personal and more introspective. At its heart, it's a coming-of-age story disguised as a world-saving mission. And maybe that's why it hits differently. Some people found it confusing, others called it messy or vague, but that's part of what makes it interesting. You're left with questions. Is Laguna really Squall's dad? Who exactly is Ultimecia? What's up with that creepy final sequence? What's the deal with faceless Squall? These aren't plot holes, they're puzzle pieces left scattered on purpose. Paired with the low-key dialogue and subtle storytelling, Final Fantasy VIII creates a world that refuses to hold your hand. It gives you just enough to piece things together but leaves a lot intentionally vague. Some answers are clear if you're paying attention, The game never outright says it, but all signs point to Laguna being Squall's father. But then there are the moments that don't come with a neat explanation. The scene with Squall's face vanishing? That's pure symbolism, wide open for interpretation. Over the years, the game has inspired some pretty wild theories. But there are two theories that are absolutely insane. One of the wildest theories out there is that Rinoa eventually becomes Ultimecia. And honestly, the more you look into it, the more disturbing sense it makes. Fans point to how Rinoa, who starts off as this hopeful and emotional character, begins to shift as the story progresses, becoming more powerful, more isolated, and more affected by the chaos around her. The connection gets deeper when you realize that Ultimecia's abilities as a sorceress are inherited, and Rinoa becomes a sorceress herself. Some players believe that after the events of the game, she's rejected by the world, loses Squall, and eventually breaks under the weight of her powers and loneliness. Over generations, that grief and rage twist her into the cold, time-obsessed witch we face at the end. Even their character designs fuel the theory. Ultimecia's armor has feather-like shapes, possibly referencing Rinoa's angel wing motif. Adding fuel to the fire, in Dissidia Final Fantasy, Ultimecia's exclusive weapons are named after Rinoa's blaster edges, Valkyrie, Cardinal, and Shooting Star, suggesting a deeper connection between the two. Now this one is straight up wild. There's a theory that Squall actually dies at the end of Disc 1, right after taking that massive ice spike to the chest during the battle with Edea. What comes next? According to this idea, it's not real. It's a dream, or more like a dying hallucination. His brain firing off one last fantasy in the final moments of his life. And when you look at what happens after that scene, the game does get weird. Squall wakes up without a single scratch. No wound, no explanation, just back to normal. Then the story starts to drift into surreal territory with compressed time, bizarre plot twists, and that infamous ending where Squall's face fades into static, and he seems completely lost inside his own mind. For some fans, that moment isn't just symbolic. It's the final spark before everything goes dark. Both theories have been denied by the dev team, but that hasn't stopped them from becoming part of the game's legacy. They're compelling. They make sense in strange ways, and they add a layer of mystery that a more straightforward story never could. And this kind of ambiguity only works because the game doesn't explain everything. It trusts the player to engage, to question, to wonder, and that's rare, especially for a game released in 1999. Even Katazi once joked that if they ever tried to remake Final Fantasy VIII, he'd lose his mind trying to make sense of it all. And yet, none of it would have worked without a strong main character. Squall Leonhardt is one of the most divisive protagonists in the series. When you're a teenager, he seems cool, mysterious, even badass in that aloof, silent way. But when you replay the game as an adult, you start to see the cracks. He's not just edgy for the sake of it, he's scared, insecure, and emotionally shut down. But the further you get, the more his walls start to break. That growth hits differently when you're older, and it adds so much depth to his journey. Still, I've got to be honest, Squall's development is solid, but his romance with Rinoa never really hit me the way it should have. Their relationship starts off with some tension and personality clashes, but then, out of nowhere, it turns into this deep, passionate love that feels kind of forced. And look, I love romance in games. I was a mess by the end of Final Fantasy X and 15. But here in 8, it didn't land. It felt like the game wanted me to care more than it actually gave me reasons to. And the rest of the party doesn't help much either. They have cool designs and moments here and there, but overall this might be the most forgettable cast in the series. They show up, they say a few things, and that's about it. There's not much emotional weight to their arcs, and most of them just end up fading into the background, while the story doubles down on Squall and Rinoa. The remastered version of Final Fantasy VIII is hands down the best way to experience the game today. It brings in sharper character models, cleaner textures, and quality-of-life features like battle boosts, no encounter toggles, and speed multipliers that make replaying way smoother, especially for players who want to focus on the story or skip the grind-heavy parts. But if you're on PC, the real magic happens when you dive into the modding scene. The community has done incredible work restoring lost details, improving background art with AI upscaling, enhancing music quality, and even fixing the awkward font used in the remaster. There are full texture packs that blend the original aesthetic with modern polish, and some mods go as far as replacing the character models with versions closer to the original CG cutscenes. With the right setup, it feels like a full-on remake. So if you're planning to revisit this classic, grab the remastered version, and don't sleep on the mods, they elevate the entire experience. And hey, if you enjoyed the content, don't forget to download Xmod using the link below. It won't take more than a minute, I promise. Every single download gives the channel a small commission and helps me keep bringing more videos like this your way. Also, don't forget to hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.